they actually, we know they get most of their nutrition from photosynthesis, so we can just go home. No, but it is pretty quick because they do get most from photosynthesis. So we're just going to run through this. This is really common sense stuff. That's why it's fast. Okay, obviously, most of the plants water is weight. Weight is water. And so basically, where is the water? Mostly.
Vacuoles.
In the vacuoles, causing turgor pressure. So what happens is when plant cells divide and they reproduce, we'll talk about this in plant hormones next week, but they actually, hormones cause them to secrete acid into the cell wall, mush it up, and then water flows in. As the water flows in, it like elongates the cell. So that's how plant cells grow, if you ever wondered, because they have a cell wall. They can't just like get bigger like an animal cell. I thought it was keeping you out, so.
Yeah, because we were thinking like after that's the cycle when it said like that the cell wall just like grows in the middle. I was like, so how do they grow?
Yeah, so it actually forms it somehow out of the cellulose, but I don't know that either. But anyway, so most of that water weight is actually in the cells from, it's taking it up from the roots, and then it fills up the vacuoles and causes turgor pressure and all that junk that we already learned. Remember that it also supplies the hydrogen for photosynthesis, and it becomes the hydrogen in sugar. So, and just a little fact that 90% of all the plant's water is lost to transpiration, but it just keeps recycling it. So it evaporates from the air, and then it pulls up more through the roots. It would be even worse if the stomates weren't able to close. But that's important because that provides, remember from last week, plant transport, the sucking motion kind of is the transpiration, which pulls all the water all the way up from the roots. So it's just kind of continually moving through. So can I keep going? Okay. So ignoring the water, which is most of the weight of the plant, most of the weight is the cellulose, is the cell walls, which we know are a string of glucose. So pretty much the weight of the plant is carbs, which we already knew. But 5% is the other minerals. So we're just going to mostly talk about where do they get those minerals from, how do they get them, and that kind of stuff. A lot of this is kind of ecology based, so it'll give us a little bit of ecology since we haven't had it yet. This is the most ecology you'll get out of me until the end of the year. Okay, so plant nutrients are divided into macronutrients and micronutrients. Macro, they need a bunch. Micro, they just need a little bit. So they obviously need a lot of carbon and oxygen, which comes from CO2 from the air, which you knew. And then what else do you think would be a macro? What else would they need a lot of without looking?
Hydrogen.
Okay, hydrogen from water.
Nitrogen and sulfur.
All right, you guys have all the answers. What do they need nitrogen for without looking?
Soil.
Proteins and nucleic acids. Sulfur would be proteins, phosphates,
It's an acidic.
phosphorus, which would be part of phosphates,
Oh, whoa.
nucleotides, ATP. I added some stuff to the PowerPoint, phosphorylation cascades and cell signaling. That's not on your thing. Well, I mean, you know it already. You know that's what phosphates are used for. Main thing that we had, do you remember what we used potassium for? We talked about last week. What's the main thing it's used for
ATP.
from last week?
Spiral.
Potassium. They
Potassium.
pump it into the guards, yes. So remember, they actually pump hydrogen ions out, which causes them to flow in, make it hypertonic. Water flows in, swells guard cells, and opens them. That is their main thing. Magnesium is a metal. Most metals are never a macronutrient, but it turns out that magnesium is an important part of chlorophyll. So it actually is a macronutrient in plants. In us, it's a very micronutrient.
Is it because it's supposed to be like kind of conductive in the chlorophyll?
I mean, it's just part of the chlorophyll. I don't know. It's part of the antenna part. Okay, so we already went through this, what they're used for. So is there anything we missed? No. Calcium, we didn't talk about that, but it is a cofactor. What's cofactor? Did it touch us? Right, so it fits into the active site of an enzyme, makes it work right. So it has the same function as a coenzyme, but it's not, can't be called a coenzyme because it's not organic. It's little.
Wait, Miss Chamness, doesn't a cofactor work by like charges, like positive and negative charges?
Yeah, so it fits into the active site and makes it the right shape, so it probably changes the shape of the active site. And we already talked about magnesium. Micronutrients, you don't need to memorize them. They just need them in very small amounts. And they're going to get all the micronutrients are coming from the soil. So almost everything's coming from the soil except for the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is a huge problem with farming, right? Because we take all the nutrients out of the soil.
So what is it that's in like Miracle You know, like
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's probably got a lot of nitrogen in it, and a lot of these nutrients.
Wait, so do you end up not working with this? Because how you feed it, you a little bit on the active site?
Yeah, it's kind of like coenzymes. They probably would work, but not very well without
I
them.
should play some back.
So when you have nutrient poor soil, a lot of times the plants can't even get the nutrients that they need, so they stop growing. And actually, that's a huge, huge problem, guys, that we're going to talk about in general. But they basically, I don't know what the rate is, but they've been calculating the desertification on Earth, meaning changing land into desert. Desert is like the most inhospitable place that we biome on Earth. Not many things can grow there. And what we're actually finding out is that we're turning rainforest into deserts. And so what happens is in the rainforest, there's so many trees that they suck up all the nutrients out of the soil. They suck a lot of the water up out of the soil. So if you chop them down and then like sell the wood or build houses out of it, all the nutrients are out of the ground. And so they've been doing that in the rainforest to make money off of the wood, but also to clear areas for farming. The problem is you can only farm about 1 year. So there's not enough nutrients in the soil to support crops. So you grow 1 year crop and then nothing else will grow. And that's like a huge problem. Then what happens is, you remember on the previous slide, it said that 90% of the water is recycled through the trees. So if you don't have trees when it rains, it used to be a rainforest, when it rains, instead of being soaked up by the trees and evaporate back up and then rain and soaked up and evaporate, the water runs off because there's nothing to suck it up. So it's going to run, and actually if there's not, it's going to go to a lake, a pond, a river, but it's going to go further away from where it used to be. So what happens is the whole water cycle, now when it evaporates, it's not evaporating in the same place that it was before, it was evaporating out of the trees. So now it stops raining there. It might rain more somewhere else, but it stops raining there. And so then it eventually actually becomes a desert. So every time we cut down rainforests, a lot of it is really becoming desert. So basically we're making much more of the planet a desert. So that obviously is a concern. So it's hard to tell other countries though what to do with their resources, because we certainly cut down all of our trees. We replanted, but okay. Most of you guys don't know that much about soil, and if you, how many of you have environmental science or took that? Mrs. Lauer? No one? Shayla? Do you have it now?
Miss A.
Okay. Okay, and she goes into a lot of this stuff. She spends a lot more time in all this stuff than I do. But basically, didn't you do a bunch of soil things?
yeah, we went outside and she had a soil expert.
Yeah. So we're not going to go into much detail. We're doing one slide. Soil is eroded rock. So when you really think about dirt, it's inorganic. The humus, there is usually humus in soil, which is like when stuff decays, it has organic matter, so you do usually have some organics on top of the soil. Yeah.
It's basically humus what compost heaps on.
Like, wow, that's really sad.
What when the people.
That's what it would become, yeah, when it decays, and that's why people do it, because then you can spread it out. It makes a great fertilizer. So rather than just throwing it away.